Everyone in Springbrook had heard stories about the old lakeside cabin. The children whispered about it at school, daring each other to get close. Adults dismissed it as local superstition, though none would admit they'd never ventured there themselves. When Jake and his friends graduated high school, they planned one final weekend trip together before college took them separate ways. It seemed natural, even exciting, to choose the old cabin on Whisper Lake. They arrived on a chilly Friday afternoon. The place was isolated, hidden behind thick pines, with gray wooden boards warped and peeling from decades of neglect. But the inside wasn't as bad as they'd expected. A dusty couch, an empty fireplace, a kitchen stocked with rusty utensils, and two small bedrooms. They unpacked quickly and began their celebration. As darkness fell, they lit a bonfire near the shore. Stories flowed freely, fueled by laughter and bravado, until Kyle began recounting a local legend he'd heard as a child. They say this place used to belong to the Millers, family of four. One summer night in the 80s, they all vanished without a trace, except their youngest son, Isaac. He wandered out of the woods weeks later, alone, covered in mud, unable to speak. They said something in the lake had taken his family. His friends laughed off the tale, accusing Kyle of trying to scare them. Yet as the fire burned low and shadows stretched longer, each felt uneasy glancing at the calm, dark lake. Eventually, exhausted and chilled by night air, they headed inside to sleep. Jake awoke suddenly around 3 a.m., startled by a rhythmic tapping sound coming from outside his window. At first, he assumed it was just brushes brushing against the old cabin, but the rhythm was too precise, too insistent. Tap, tap, tap. He got up cautiously, his heart pounding softly. Through the grimy glass, illuminated by moonlight, he saw footprints, freshly pressed in damp mud, leading from the lake directly to the window. His breath quickened as panic rose inside him. He raced to the other room, shaking Kyle awake. "Someone's outside," he whispered urgently. Kyle stumbled to his feet, grabbing a flashlight, and both boys moved toward the front door. Jake's hand shook as he turned the rusty knob and swung the door open into silence. They shined the flashlight around, finding nothing unusual at first, until the beam caught something strange on the shore. Dozens of muddy footprints scattered across the sand, all leading up from the lake surrounding their cabin. Terrified, they ran back inside, locked the door, and woke the others. Together, they waited anxiously until dawn finally broke. With daylight, the footprints vanished as if they had never existed. But each friend knew they had seen them. They left hastily, never speaking about that night again. Years later, Jake returned to Whisper Lake, drawn by unanswered questions. The cabin was gone, demolished years ago, leaving only overgrown weeds. He walked to the water's edge, staring out at the perfectly calm surface. And as he turned to leave, something behind him whispered his name, softly carried by the wind, just loud enough to make him doubt if he'd imagined it at all. Jessica had never planned on stopping at the old Greenwood Inn, but heavy rains and a flat tire forced her off the road and into the lonely roadside motel. It was nearly midnight when she entered the dimly lit lobby. The elderly receptionist barely looked up, sliding a rusty key across the desk. "Room 317, the woman murmured quietly. Jessica nodded, exhausted and grateful for shelter. As she climbed the creaking stairs, she noticed the hallway on the third floor was unusually quiet, no sounds of TVs or murmurs of conversation. Her footsteps echoed strangely off the faded wallpaper and worn carpet. Room 317 smelled musty and cold. Jessica shivered and quickly locked the door behind her. The room seemed untouched for years, with old-fashioned wallpaper, a cracked mirror above a dresser, and curtains stiff with dust. But she was too tired to complain. In bed, Jessica tossed restlessly. At precisely 2:45 a.m., she woke abruptly, heart racing. Something had disturbed her sleep, a sound she couldn't quite remember, like whispers fading from a dream. As she sat up, she noticed the room felt even colder now, almost freezing. Her breath fogged in front of her. Then, clearly, she heard footsteps pacing slowly in the room above her, heavy, dragging steps. She frowned, confused. Wasn't she already on the top floor? She quickly grabbed her phone, shining its flashlight upward, revealing stained ceiling tiles. The pacing continued, growing louder, almost aggressive. Jessica nervously called the front desk, her voice shaking. "Could you ask the guest upstairs to keep it down?" A chilling pause followed before the receptionist replied quietly, "Ma'am, there is no room above 317. Jessica's pulse quickened as the footsteps suddenly stopped. The room fell deathly silent, leaving her alone with her racing thoughts. She cautiously lay back down, gripping her phone tightly, deciding to wait until morning to leave. Just as her eyelids grew heavy again, she felt a soft weight shift the mattress beside her. Frozen in terror, Jessica could only watch as the indentation slowly moved toward her. The sound of shallow breathing whispered against her ear, cold as ice. Gathering all her courage, Jessica bolted from the bed, flinging open the door, stumbling barefoot down the dark hallway. At the front desk, the receptionist stared at her knowingly, sadness in her eyes. "You felt it too," she whispered softly, handing Jessica back her forgotten keys. "Everyone in room 317 does. It never lets you leave quietly." Jessica fled that night, never looking back. But sometimes, late at night, when she lay safely in her own bed miles away, she'd swear she still heard slow, dragging footsteps pacing somewhere above her, and a whisper too faint to understand. It's following her wherever she went.